Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 813th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege today of being your MC for a conversation featuring Jason Labate, Taylor Aikin, and Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper. We're also thrilled to welcome poet Amy Saul-Zerby here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guests and host. Jason Labate's practice areas include real estate and community development, nonprofit formation and governance, and real estate and project finance. He is a frequent panelist on faith-based and nonprofit issues and was a recipient of this year's NYSCC's Community Development Award. Jason also serves as co-chair of Bricks and Mortals, which we'll learn more about today. Taylor Aikin is an associate partner at MBB Architects, a multidisciplinary architectural firm in Manhattan focused on serving mission-driven institutions. He serves as vice chair of the board of Bricks and Mortals and is serving on the mayor's working group for faith-based affordable housing development. And our host today, community builder Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper, served as senior minister of Judson Memorial Church from 2006 to 2021. As an elder, she's passionately concerned about leaving the next generation well prepared for all they have to face. She has written over 35 books, most recently I Heart Francis, Letters to the Pope from an Unlikely Admirer. We are lucky to have her as an editor at large here at the Rail. And I'm so thrilled to have you all on the NSC today, and over to you, Donna.
All right, thank you so much, and welcome everybody. It's so good to see you in this very interesting space on Zoom again. I've been looking forward to this presentation because it is about something that Edgar Allan Poe, one of my favorite writers, ever thought about. You might have read his famous story about the purloined letter, where something is hidden in plain sight. The clue to the whole mystery is just sitting right there on the table during the whole letter, and nobody can find it and nobody sees it. One of the clues to the present moment in our world is space and place. And hidden in plain sight are many buildings, office buildings, malls, banks, remember banks and tellers, and religious sites are undergoing a profound transformation. And when we look at them, we often see empty and unused. And the organization Bricks and Mortals came together almost 5 years ago now to look and see the clue to space and place that was hidden there. These buildings are public spaces. They're culturally dense spaces. They're places where you can actually go to the bathroom and not have to buy a cup of coffee. They are free places. They are third sector places, and they really are important. When they're gone, we will really miss them. I guarantee you. So Bricks and Mortals is a catchword to say, let's pay attention now to these public, cultural, dense places. Now, while there's a chance to adapt the sacred sites to reuses that help everybody, which is their intention. So it's my pleasure to introduce two good friends, Taylor Aikin, an architect, and Jason Labate, a lawyer, who got into this work because they care about what I just said, about the value of these buildings. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves with a question, and I'll start with Jason. Jason, why are you giving all your good time to this kind of work? What matters? What calls you to it?
Thanks, Donna. My thanks to Brooklyn Rail for having us and hosting this conversation and highlighting the issue. So let's see how far back I want to go. So I've always been a community-minded person and had sort of a prior career in government and not-for-profits. And while I was at the health department in the Bloomberg administration, if people can remember back that far, the commissioner had this really incredible graphic, which was a public health pyramid. And at the top of the pyramid was the touch point, right? Whether you could make a direct intervention with an individual. And at the bottom of the pyramid, if you could imagine, is the effect on the health outcome that it had. So you're further away from the individual, but you have the greatest effect for those items that are on the bottom of the pyramid. And the bottom of the pyramid was your socioeconomic factors, your community.
Mhm.
And so I'd always been community minded. I've been doing health work for a few years while I was there. And I said, that's it. This is what I want to do. So at that point, I had my master's in public administration and said, I need to go to law school to figure out how to help communities leverage and manage their assets in a very sort of carnivorous, shark-infested, capitalistic, wonderful free United States of America that we have. And so I went to law school and I came out on the other side of it and started working in affordable housing and community development. And very quickly in New York City, discovered the richness that are faith-based organizations and saw how this is not their, managing their real estate is not their primary function. And so really seeing how unfair that that ecosystem was, really wanted to make it more of a fair fight and make sure that these faith-based organizations have the information and the resources and the community and the supports to continue, and to, if they can't continue, how to make informed decisions on how to use their property, not emergent and panicked ones. And as fate would have it, which seems to happen frequently, Donna is a frequent commuter on the train of fate. I crossed paths with Donna a couple times. The first time Donna was like, this is amazing, we need to talk more. And then Donna was gone off to whatever her next great thing was. And then she was, of course, the keynote speaker at another event. And Donna told me about Bricks and Mortals. And it was doing exactly those things that I highlighted, really creating community and empowering faith-based organizations around their real property. And so I, have been convinced ever since, and really see the good work that's being done. Because and I'll wrap up here for now. As Donna says, these are public or quasi-public spaces. And all too frequently, we are marketizing our city. And so we're getting less and less communal and public spaces. And so to figure out how to do this in an informed way and empower communities and organizations to keep these spaces for public purposes. I don't know what else to do. It's the calling.
So I'm going to say a value alignment. You got bit by the bug because your values lined up. And if I can just add one sentence to what Jason said, churches are missing legal and administrative experience. So thank God people who have the same values that some of us might have, if not exactly the same faiths or whatever, helped us out. Taylor, how about you? How'd you get involved?
Yeah, hi, and thank you all for coming, and thank you for the invitation. This is fun. It would be very simple to say that I was driven to this by a deep and abiding faith, but I'd have been happy doing that in my own time. What actually brought me to this was a project. We were hired, and I'll I can talk later about what our firm does and sort of why it fits into this. But we were hired by a synagogue who was entering a development deal that was going to tear down their building, build a bunch of condos, and give them a facility in the base. And as we were working on this, it sort of occurred to me to ask the question of whether this was a good idea. And the answer was not obvious. So in trying to discern an answer, I went and found the people that I could find that were the most thoughtful and informed about this, chief among them, Donna, who was at the time teaching a seminar on ethical development for faith-based organizations. So what came out of that was the realization that this question of religious properties and all of our relationships to them, both the organizations that occupy them, the people in the neighborhood that surround them, the urban fabric itself and everybody in it, is one of the most interesting, difficult problems I've encountered. And my interest in this and my work on it has only expanded because architecture can only get you so far. And the questions have only gotten more interesting. The answers have only gotten more nuanced. And yeah, so it's sheer curiosity that drove me to this rather than.
Yep. Nothing like good old curiosity. So because we're talking about buildings first and their meaning second, and we're doing that in a non-binary way, we think the buildings have meaning. It's not, this is the building and that's the meaning. It's a partnership. I'm going to ask Taylor to show some of his slides first, so you can get the buildings into the room.
Thank you. So there's me. This is our firm, MBB Architects, and like Eleanor said in the introduction, the backbone of our practice is serving mission-driven institutions, and that can take a lot of forms, but it means that we're very focused on the relationships between people and their buildings. And so that's the firm. The other hat I'm wearing today is as vice chair of the board of Bricks and Mortals. There's me. I don't know why I'm always standing in the same spot in group photos. There I am. This was with the mayor's working group. So on the one hand, thinking about how buildings themselves contribute to this issue. On the other hand, thinking about the bigger picture and policies and procedures and everything else that supports it. So when we talk about adaptation in religious buildings, it can mean a lot of things, but the core meaning is universal, that healthy institutions evolve over time, cities evolve over time, societies evolve over time. Buildings don't. Buildings, we have to drag them along behind us to make them do for us what we need them to do now and in the future. Adaptation is a constant, continual act, and it is the business of the architect, figuring out how to evolve buildings to keep up with where we are. So in our work, that takes the form of finding ways for architecture to better serve the needs of the institutions that it houses. But that's not the only form that can take. So for example, we can talk more about specific examples. A synagogue who realizes that they have a space for 150 people for a daily worship service that regularly has about 30 and no community space for people who are coming and leaving the building. So what we do is we create a space for 30 people and then we realign the space. So this is a wonderful, elegant solution, and it will last for a period of time, and then it will be irrelevant. It will again need to be evolved. Or this same organization realized that their education space was oversized, and so we carved out a big chunk of their floor to give them this flexible worship space that they needed some of the time. They don't need it all the time, so we also made it dividable and made it flexible. These are not pews, these are chairs. Donna, I know you have a lot to say about pews. But it's an example of sort of how that plays out in our work, even when we're talking about active congregations in religious buildings. But that can look other ways too. This is the Cathedral of St. Salve on 26th Street. It was gutted by fire 6 years ago, Easter Sunday, a tragic accident, and has been sitting there as a shell of a building since. And we were able to work with them and through almost purely administrative processes, get them back in the building. This was their first worship service on St. Sava Day with the patriarch of the Serbian Orthodox Church in from Serbia. And so they're now reoccupying this space as part of the adaptation, the ongoing evolution of this building. And as they think about reconstruction, restoration, their current needs and what they anticipate for the future is going to mean it is going to appear very different than it was when it was gutted by fire. So that's our business. And then when we think about what that means, the value that these buildings have, big picture, as Jason said, we are the pulse of the city is driven by development. And when it comes to these spaces as public assets, I just want to think for a minute about the context of the creation of new public assets in the city over the last 10, 15 years. Think about some of the most exciting, well, we'll have different examples, but new public spaces to come on the scene. Oh, wait, I forgot about this one. This is just too good not to share. We are doing the restoration work at Trinity Church, Wall Street. This is a cartoon from 1907 that sort of imagined the trajectory of development and its impact on religious buildings in New York City. My favorite part, if you can see, it doesn't quite clear the steeple. So this is over 100 years old and still is captures very clearly a sentiment that we're still seeing. So new public spaces. The High Line, for example, great addition. So this is an asset to New York City that is public and free. However you feel about it, this is contentious, but Hudson Yards, new public free, Little Island, a new public free space, or closer to home, Domino Park, or of course, Brooklyn Bridge Park. All of these have one thing in common. They are all funded through development. These are, most of them, public-private partnerships, but the era of grand municipal projects to create valuable assets for the people of New York City, it's over. Now, I don't want to discount the work they're doing at Penn Station. It's important and it's great, but it ain't this. So when Jason describes religious buildings as a public asset, as something that is integral to the fabric of communities and something that needs to be preserved, this is what we're talking about. We're not getting new great public assets from the public. We're getting new public assets from development that is often, back to Hudson Yards, is often aligned with the interests of the developer rather than aligned with the interests of the public, and not answerable to a community because the community isn't funding it, isn't voting for the people who are paying for it. So here's just a handful of demolished church buildings over the last 10, 15 years. Here's a handful of buildings that have been repurposed. Now, a couple of these, this one, St. Thomas the Apostle in Harlem, was converted as a concert venue, so it's still semi-public. This one is partially a gallery, this other one in Harlem. But by and large, when church buildings get bought and repurposed, they get repurposed for housing. And that takes what is a critical public asset and it privatizes it. And this is specifically about the buildings. Donna, I trust that there'll be some conversation about halo effect, but I'll give a preview now.
Do it. Good.
The organizations that operate inside these buildings have value to more than the people who sit in the pews of worship. That they are the front line and the bulwark against the social service gap that the city is not providing. Anytime there's a crisis, anytime there's a need, it is the faith community of New York City that steps up. Last week, I got a call from our professional organization here in New York saying that the city had reached out and they are freaked out about housing asylum seekers in the city. And could the architectural community think up creative solutions. And oh, by the way, has anybody called all the churches yet to see if we can use their space? It's everybody's first idea that the faith community can solve the social service problems that the city faces. So the HALO study is a study that was done, I think, 2006 and then updated in 2010 and updated in 2016, where they actually tried to put dollars and cents to this. And they looked at a number of congregations around the country and found that on average, the communities that surround a faith organization benefit to the tune of $1.7 million a year. That's average. Now, Donna, what was the number for Judson?
I can't remember, but it was at least that. It was in that area.
It was $21 million a year.
Yeah, it's a very high value because of the immigration work we were already doing. And so, yeah, there you go.
Exactly. So these are concentrations of public life, as Donna said. At Judson, when the building was shut down at the beginning of the pandemic, and the city was in a cultural crisis in the moment of the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, people came to Judson, couldn't get in the building, and camped on the sidewalk. What I love about what Eleanor said at the beginning, reminders of place. Place matters. You can't go do that just anywhere. And the historic nodes that we've set up for this kind of activity endure. And when those nodes go away, the activity diffuses and in the end is lost. But not to say that the buildings themselves are enough. This is at 8th Street, I think. This is the former St. Anne's Armenian Church. Now this is a monster dormitory by NYU. That is the front 12 feet of the church, which was preserved by fiat from the city. And then the rest of it was demolished, and there's not even a shell, just a facade. This is a very unsatisfying solution to both the question of place and the question of meaning of these places. And then we have other examples. This is West Park Presbyterian Church, and it has for some time been the poster child for all of the forces, all of the emotion, all of the difficulty of these questions. It's a landmark building that is crumbling, is largely empty, and cannot be altered, nor can it be repaired, nor can it be used for something else because the cost of repair is so far outstripped by the cost. Its value is so far outstripped by the cost of repair. And this is where bricks and mortars comes in. This is the case study that proves that the solutions available now are inadequate. We need more creative thinking, better solutions, more options available, both for the buildings and for the organizations that operate within them. The punchline, I guess, from what I said at the beginning, trying to decide whether that project I was working on was a good idea. I still think that one was a pretty good idea, but not everywhere, not always. It depends. Every block, every congregation, every building requires a different set of considerations and a different set of priorities. And the only constant is the need for a good process. So understanding all of those things is not simply a matter of observing them. They need to be discovered. And then working from that discovery toward solutions that are truly serve the public, truly serve the organizations in support of what they do for the public. That's the business we're in. And that, I think, is the answer to what's going to get us toward a better set of solutions. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Taylor. Very, very helpful. And bringing out the big distinctions early. That's good. I'm going to hold questions and have Jason show us some more pictures. Again, we're talking about buildings. We got to look at them. And then we'll talk.
Great. Thank you, Donna. Before I do that, I just want to, I think, riff a little bit on what Taylor had said and sort of levels.
Mhm.
So, lest we forget a few things. Faith-based organizations, particularly churches from, the period of colonization, controversial, I understand, were the organizations that provided all the charitable and social service work in the city. And as Taylor said, this has been a theme that has continued for the history of the country, at least in this manifestation. And frequently they are thought of as, oh, they will do it, but we don't think about sort of supporting. And I think that that's a critical, something that we all need to be thoughtful about, exactly for the reasons that Taylor identified. Harlem is a great example. There are many other communities in the city that are having their faith-based organizations replaced by luxury. And to just give you a quick anecdote, I was at a community board meeting where somebody was very irate and said, I don't understand, how could that church dare sell their property and allow themselves to be turned into luxury condos? I raised my hand and I said, well, how many times did you approach that church before it was gone? And they were like, never. But how dare they sell themselves and become a luxury condo? There's two things I want to get at it, right? Like we need, hopefully everyone's here because we're about community. Like if you are, and it's about space, like I think that we need each other, maybe as obvious as that may sound, particularly in space, right? If you care about something, don't take it for granted. Know who's in your community. The other thing that I want to underline before I get to my pictures is these are, right, we live in a capitalistic society. It's founded on private property. Although we are referring to these as public or quasi-public spaces, and I'll give great examples of that and I'm sure that we'll talk about it. These properties are owned by these faith-based organizations. They have no obligation to program them for public benefit, but they've done it for the most part, right? And I realize that, faith-based organizations can be controversial, but writ large, they choose to program their spaces for public benefit and be available to them. And therefore, I think it's incumbent upon us. I love this dates back to my very, very young youth when there were VHS tapes. I'm sure nobody knows on the call what a VHS tape is. And Betamax concurrent or even before that, it was the allegory of the north wind and the sun. And the idea is that, they made a bet and who could make the man take off his hat and coat. And the north wind said, oh, I'm super powerful and I can do it. And the north wind blew as hard as it could and the man only held his hat and his jacket on harder. But the sun, just very gently made the man comfortable, identify what the man's needs were. And of course, by the end of it, he is down to his skivvies and he's taken off his hat and coat and he's swimming in the water. This is how faith-based organizations and these properties need to be approached, right? That too frequently we're approaching them with a hammer and saying, this is what you have to do for the community, as opposed to having conversations and saying, how can we work together to serve the community? So with that, I will turn this into. If I can find the share. Okay. Great. Okay, so this is not a faith-based owned property, but it is illustrative of the same issue. One, this is one of my favorite pictures, I think, of all time. This is a building that I guess is evolving, as Taylor would say, but not by any intention. It is being reclaimed by the earth. This is a public school in Harlem that was decommissioned, I want to say, in the 80s sat idle for a very long period of time. No one knew what to do with it. Was eventually deeded to the local YMCA, so continuing its public legacy. But the YMCA didn't have the resources to do anything. And so again, it sat idle, even after it was deeded to the YMCA. Until ultimately many supports, including discretionary funds from elected officials, historic tax grants, low-income housing tax credits, and bonds, and ultimately turned this eyesore, right, this community blight, into a community asset. And what it did was it turned it into this on the other side. You can see it kept the trees and the foliage on the outside. And this is, as I recall, something between 60 and 80 affordable housing units with the YMCA space in the ground floor. I mean, it's really quite impressive. And you can see the side by side, right? This is the school as it stood in all of its grandeur right before construction. You can see the what should be condemned auditorium. I'm not even sure what this is on the lower left, and turned into really amazing first-rate affordable housing. And you can see the Class A space for the clients and the kids of the YMCA. I mean, a huge, huge win, but it really took a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of smart people, or at least experienced people to pull all of this together, which is a way to say that it's not easy. This is an example of a building that, right, was essentially rudderless, didn't have an owner, and then didn't have an owner with the resources to purpose it. So ideally, I think the other side of this, there's two takeaways from this. One is that it's possible to really keep these, and if I didn't say already, it's landmark, which is how it leveraged historic tax credit, which churches can't leverage because they're a not-for-profit. But it maintained and leveraged this community asset, but it took a really long time. And so we want, before it becomes an eyesore and really a drain on the community, we want to enliven these spaces and work cooperatively. So that's one example. I will say, although not a faith-based organization, plenty of faith-based organizations own schools or, that have dwindling enrollment or have ceased to function. And so this sort of repurposing is certainly something that they could do. This is sort of a smaller but equally important initiative, which is, this is a modest church in Queens, happens to be Episcopalian church, and they identified that there was a community need to support LGBTQ plus youth, and that they had underutilized space in their parish hall, which was their basement. And so they decided that they wanted to do what they could, and in their basement created transitional housing, working with the Ali Forney Center for LGBTQ youth aging out of foster, which is, if people don't know, is among the highest, or the populations at greatest risk for homelessness, is LGBTQ youth aging out of foster. Just one thing that can be done to show that there are many partnerships and programming that can be done in these spaces if the faith-based organizations want to do it and they get support from the community. This is another example. So this is St. Anne and the Holy Trinity, which is in Brooklyn. It is a landmark church and is really an impressive. The reason that I'm going to walk through this is going back to the public school, the structures, the day that they are put into service, begin to deteriorate. And sort of the bigger and more impressive they are, the more impressive the costs are to maintain them. And especially if they're landmark, you have to maintain them into landmark standards, which this does. And so it's at deteriorating slowly for decades. And what they did was to really maximize their partnerships and how they use their space. So what I circled in the yellow on the right is their sanctuary space. And their sanctuary space, they really have created partnerships. I'll give you 2 examples in a moment, to really enliven that space and make sure that it doesn't sit. They haven't removed the pews, Donna, but they've managed to make it productive and have created partnerships with arts organizations and other community organizations to really maximize that space. 1, to maintain the facility, but 2, to benefit the community. And on the left, you see in that blue oval is what's called the parish hall and parish house. And they have programmed that impressively. So they had a number of small tenants or multiple tenants renting out space that they had to, unfortunately, ask them to leave while they undertook critical repairs, right? There were leaks and there were all these sorts of things. They performed those repairs, and it gave them the opportunity to think more holistically about what they wanted to do with that space. And so after several discussions with community organizations, they entered into a lease with St. Anne's School. So this is St. Anne's on the Holy Trinity. St. Anne's School grew out of this church, but now is its own separate not-for-profit, totally independent. But there were many synergies, and they said, we love this space, and we want to use it for additional office space so we can create programming out. That is now, I think, on its 3rd renewal, and has resulted in a great partnership between St. Anne's School and St. Anne's Church, right? And has created a sort of a campus, I think, of both the school and the church. What it also did was create other synergies, because there's a parish hall on the 1st floor that, when the school was remodeling their cafeteria, needed a place to feed its students. And so for a period of 6 months or so, was able to use the parish hall and improve it, and then ultimately return it to the church in a way that the church could use, that was more functional for its soup kitchen and for its other purposes. So just an example of how community organizations can work together, really to the mutual benefit of all of them. So this is what it was not what it looked like a decade ago. They have really refurbished the sanctuary. There was leaking at the roof, and they undertook a not cheap renovation in order to restore it to its glory. You can see just sort of how impressive it is. And in part because of its impressiveness, but also because of its location, it is a great site for other partnerships. So I believe it was in 2019, Theater of War Productions, which is sort of a socially minded not-for-profit theater company, commissioned the sanctuary to have a several-week run of Antigone in Ferguson. And you can see they really transformed the sanctuary. They brought in exterior porta potties and air conditioning and all sorts of things to offer for free this very relevant, present tense, socially minded event, artwork, and really political statement on the importance of really caring for all of us. And so that was immensely powerful and important. And then you can see, here's another example. So again, working with St. Anne's School, in addition to using the other portions of the property for its major events, graduation, this happens to be the 50th anniversary, has used the property for major events. And really an impressive space, and as I said, sort of. And so where I'm going to leave off here is, this is great. I think we've given you a range. It really can go from full, I guess, sort of defunct space that doesn't have life in it, to bringing it back to life as a community asset, to really small church serving a social function, to a larger church serving social and artistic and community functions. And it really runs the gamut. What we've noticed, and this harkens back to the whole purposes of bricks and mortals, is to create community and create, it's not necessarily a dirty word, create marketplaces. Marketplaces are just places for exchange of ideas, for services, relationships, etc. And so Bricks and Mortals has created this website, Venuely, where space users and space owners can get together to create better and more communally beneficial results, so that these spaces don't have to sit idle, and it can result in some of the examples. And I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much, Jason. I'm impressed with the questions in the chat, and I'm particularly impressed by the one from Mr. Schwartz referring to Marcel Proust and memory. And I think that's a fascinating way to talk about it. What I was trying to get at earlier in the discussion was, if these buildings were just to disappear and all become part of the gentrification process, you know, what would that mean to the city's cultural life, much less its spiritual life? And what would the city look like with so much less public space or even old beauty? But where I want to go now is to ask the question of what would happen to the arts if we were able to remove places to hear and gather. But in that context, I'm very grateful to my two colleagues for being so positive about religious institutions. And so I will go to the negative. Even though, as you know, I've given my life to religious institutions and I love them and it. There's an awful amount of spiritual injury that has happened. Moral injury, moral distress, spiritual injury. Religious institutions have not been as consoling or contributing to their communities as they might have been. And one of the things I've learned in this work is I have to say that out loud before somebody else says it. Because what's going to happen is somebody's going to say, well, why didn't you connect to your community more? Why did you act like a private club? Why did Roman Catholic priests abuse people, children? You know the rant. Has religion been an overall good? So I just want to place that on the table and say that most mature people are able to see good and bad in everything. And I know there's good and bad in religion. And right now I'm worried about saving enough public space that we might learn to live long enough to pray another day, another way, religiously. And if we can't do that, I don't want the gentrification process to win. It's mission inconsistent. So thoughts or comments? First, Jason or Taylor?
I'll let Taylor go.
Stuff to say. So, okay. Let's start with religious organizations and their relationships with their communities.
Right.
I think what we have seen in research that other good organizations are doing is that is not a monolithic picture. That varies massively from community to community and from organization to organization. So, for example, the First Abyssinian Church in Harlem was the home of the largest community pop-up vaccination center in New York City. And they did it because it was the right thing to do. They had the space, they had the will, and they coordinated with the city to do it. For every Cobble Hill church conversion to condos, there are thriving congregations in non-white communities that need extra space, that are building community, that are integral to the people around them. Now, the other trend that we see is that even among the health of religious organizations themselves, that's not a monolithic picture. That larger congregations are pretty much okay, Smaller congregations are struggling, but the more bound together congregations become, the stronger their survival prospects are, and the more integrated they are into the communities that surround them. So acknowledging the spiritual hurt, acknowledging the introversion of some of these organizations. I think you'd be surprised. Even the most introverted conservative synagogue on the Upper East Side hosts the precinct community meetings. That even organizations that are very focused on their own community remain an asset to people who do not worship there, and they remain an anchor to social service for the people who need them. And the stronger the need in the community, the stronger that anchoring tends to be.
Mhm. Yeah,
I'll stop there.
yeah, well put. Jason.
I'm going to stitch together, I'm going to try to stitch together some thoughts. So I already referenced, well, right. I'm going to remain positive and say how I think it's how can we encourage, while not minimizing what you raise.
Mhm.
How can we be positive and make these community assets?
Mhm.
And by that, I mean, and I'm sort of, hopefully you can hear it in my theme so far, what I'm going to stitch together is sort of two thoughts. One is that allegory I'm going to keep coming back to, is the north wind and the sun,
Yeah.
right? Like I think we're saying, you know, we see those faith-based organizations as insular and hurtful, and they have the history, and all of that is true. And I think, wow, I feel like I'm getting overly deep, but bear with me. Right, this right, like Martin Luther King Jr., his expectation was, yeah, we need to expect more of our brothers and sisters, and I think that that's the expectation here. For our faith-based organizations in our communities, we need to expect more. And the reason why I went to the allegory is we're going to get more not by forcing them and yelling at them and saying, you need to do this, but it is going to be that sunlight and that warmth. One, the sunlight, greatest disinfectant to say, what has happened here and let's hold account. The other is to say is like, yes, and how can we work together in partnership with you in the community? The other thing that I wanted to stitch together with that allegory is, I don't know if anybody has heard him interviewed on NPR, but Rainn Wilson, Dwight from The Office, has a book out called Soul Boom. So he's Baha'i, and Baha'i is sort of a universalist religion. And in one of the chapters, he goes through, I guess, how he believes that part of what is ailing the world is a dearth of spirituality, however that is interpreted. And then he talks about looking at really almost every religion, and that religion, without getting into the dogma, values not only the import of self, but the import of community and helping one. And so I think to remind ourselves and our faith-based community members of that, and hold them to account while supporting them in it, that's sort of how I think we reconcile with that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's we're saying the same thing, that I was just leading with the negative because I think there's reason to recognize it and acknowledge it. That I don't know that the quote community owes anything to the churches, but I believe the churches and the synagogues owe something to the community by missional, ancestral commitments to texts, if nothing else. And I really, what I pray for is more of a genuine mixture between these two places, these two spheres, always.
And I suppose there are two considerations that we can discuss. Well, so there is the congregation, there's the organization, and there is the building. And
Right.
Having a civic setting in which both survive is the best case scenario. I think that's our target. Now, what happens to the corpses of dead congregations, how those buildings can be leveraged to the public good is a very interesting question, but it does set aside half of the equation, which is how did these organizations and what the work they do, how can they adapt, how can they through their physical assets, through their architecture and their buildings, how can they again serve the public good?
Right.
I don't know if it's quite disagree with you, Donna, but I guess I want to push back a little. Whether or not the community owes anything to the religious organization, and I want to make this very local. I think that frequently we can think of large hierarchical sort of bodies, but we're talking about institutions and organizations, in our neighborhood across the street.
Right.
And our failure to engage them will be our loss, as was the case repeatedly in Harlem, and as I experienced with so much rage from that community board member who said, "How dare they?" And so to think that the faith-based organizations owe something to the community, and it is just in that direction, it's going to be all of them.
Yeah. Well, and I can switch my script because I've been absolutely absorbed with this West Park situation. And I think I've spent 12 hours on Zoom calls listening to the community board meetings about West Park, which was shown in one of the slides. And many people in that surrounding neighborhood on 89th and Amsterdam are saying, you can't take away the view out of my window. And so I of course was saying, well, how much would you like to pay for a view out of your window instead of yet another apartment building? So I think that these, like with everything, the social relationships matter so much. Somebody asked a question in the chat of how Judson avoided being taken over by NYU all these days. Hang on one minute. Could you shut that door, please, Lauren? My guests just came back from their trip they're wandering around. It's the answer to the question of how there are pictures in our history at Judson that were drawn with Washington Square Park not having Judson there, but instead yet another one of those boring buildings that NYU likes to put up around campus. And they always assumed that they would be, this was 1922, that picture was taken. And it was in a master plan that, remember master plans? They used to be, 10 years at a time. Now they're 3. That picture just assumed that we would go out of business. And the reason Judson was protected was because it kept its doors open to the community. And it said, this isn't ours, this is ours with capital O. And so NYU would have had an extraordinarily difficult time closing Judson. Nevertheless, when I got there in 2006, I went to see the then president, John, his name will come to me, Sexton. And I call, you call on people when you come to town. And he said, well, Donna, how's the congregation doing? And I said, it's doing fantastically. And he said, oh, shit, because he wanted us to be doing badly. So he would have a good reason to take us over. And that's, and then the relationships that developed, there was town gown hostility. And so the community in Judson were against NYU, but it was the better part of wisdom to engage with NYU. So when we started the immigration clinics in 2008, we got the NYU Law School to provide most of the free legal help, and we got interns from NYU. And you know, at the height of that immigration movement, the new sanctuary movement, we had 19 translators we could call up on a moment's notice from NYU and get somebody who had an African dialect or a Persian dialect to come and translate for immigrants. Once you start that kind of interpenetration of community and church or synagogue or congregation, the big guys can't touch you. That's the meaning of it. So I couldn't believe that we could call up somebody in the German department and they'd show up and translate for an immigrant, you know, walk in like they owned the place, like the immigrants were. And finally, even the presidents of NYU, and you know, their whole board is real estate people. It's lock, stock, and barrel. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, that's what New York is about too. Read any history of New York. It's all about, or the state of New York, it's all about the real estate deals and the money. So these not-for-profit institutions that have land and have buildings are super important to the economic reality. And local communities, if connected and if plural, made plural. I know you think I'm a progressive religious person, but I'm actually not. I'm conserving of religion and texts. We ought to say, what kind of Christian are you? Well, we're a plural Christian. You have to create plural community. That's what political power is. Long speech, sorry.
Good speech. Could I,
Oh.
but before we wrap up, could I take one more angle at this that I think is really important from a purely considering the public good? There's, in answering the question whether or not tearing down religious buildings and putting something new up is a good idea or not, we sort of consider that from a lot of different angles. Is it good socially? Is it good for the civic fabric? The other question is it good environmentally? And there are two real somewhat conflicting ways to think about this. The first is, I am sitting in a building that was built in 1927. And in 1927, buildings were less efficient. The information available to designers and builders in 1927 was very different than the information available to us now. And we are bound by the infrastructure of our forebears. And so here I am sitting in a building from 1927 that is generally underperforming, that is generally only moderately well suited to the ways we use it. However, there is a huge amount of carbon locked up in this building. The footprint of this building it's already built. If we tear it down and build it again, that is a massive amount of sort of waste and carbon impact to the world that is in no way in the public interest. Right. So given those two options, the third option I heard about these guys in Vancouver who are taking classic sports cars, gutting them and putting electric engines in them. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is the way we need to think about these buildings. It's how we need to think about the organizations that occupy them. It's how we need to think about how they operate in the world. They need a tune-up.
Yeah, a tune-up. And adaptive reuse. One of the reasons that congregations have these enormous halo effects of $21 million or whatever is if you had to build the building to provide the services we provide in our buildings, you couldn't afford it. You couldn't do it, especially in New York City. All right, Eleanor, what should we do now?
Well, we have a couple questions.
Good.
So the first question is from our friend GE, and Chloe will ask on GE's behalf.
Hi, everyone. Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for all of these insights and for your generous dialogue. GE is on the road today, so I'm going to ask his question on his behalf. In his essay, The Death of a Cathedral, Marcel Proust reminds us of two kinds of memory. One, voluntary, like Googling something. The other, involuntary, which is very human, though by its nature is something we can never really possess. Can repurposing these sacred places use this second memory to awaken us to some connection that's maybe hard to specify, but that has a living, vital link across time? Thank you.
May I?
Please.
The answer is yes. So the language of architecture is a language of abstraction, but it is indeed a language, and it's one that we understand because it has been codified and applied, sometimes subverted. But when we approach a church, we know it's a church. And when we approach a school, we know it's a school. That the language of residence or the language of civic grandeur or the language of spirituality and faith, you probably couldn't draw it, but you know it when you see it. And to Donna's point, the preservation of that language, and not to be replaced purely with the language of commerce, does leave the door open that we can return to it at some point. And for the churches that were converted to condos, when your child cleaning your kid's crayon off of the wall of do you understand the language of the history of the space? Maybe, maybe not. But the degree to which we can preserve those artifacts of our civic life, the better the chance they can have new life again later, because we are experiencing a moment now of dramatic transformation within our relationships with faith buildings and faith communities. It will change. Things are not now as they have been, and they will be different yet in the future. Great question. Thank you.
It's a beautiful question, and it shows the source of spiritual power deeply hidden and less institutionalized than we've been talking about.
I have two quick thoughts on this. One is, I feel like this is sharing a Donna story panel. So Donna, if she hasn't said in this venue before, and hopefully I'm not outing you because you're no longer there. There was you were fundraising, I believe, goes the story, and you really needed either unrestricted funds or funds for the roof. And there was a donor that insisted, and I'm butchering the story, so I'll let you tell it after I'm done butchering it. A donor that said, I want to give funds, but I only want to give it for the bells because it's so critical for me to hear the bells. And it's exactly that second memory that we're talking about, right? There is something just so timeless and spiritual and not cerebral about what we can get from these places and these experiences. And there is such a great value to that. I think that that's one of the takeaways from that story, Donna, is that, or are we to say that, the roof is more important to someone than the bell? They are equally important because they each provide something different to us. So that's one. The other is, right, maybe this is where I bring it down. The rates of depression and estrangement and suicide and substance abuse are so great now on the other side of COVID. And in part, it's because everyone, or we all, largely, many of us feel estranged and lack community. And so, whether it is these spaces that are maintained as is, and I do think that there is a very deep emotional, spiritual benefit to these places, but just even having a quasi public space in which to commune or engage in a community-oriented activity is valuable. And I think whether it is, even if it is not in the architecture, in the act of communing, I hope that we can awaken that sort of second type of.
Nice. Meaning deficit disorder.
Wow, thank you so much for that incredibly thought-provoking and generous question, GE. It was my pleasure to ask it on your behalf. And I'm going to pass it back to Eleanor.
Thank you so much. That was a really great question. And thank you for those great answers, Taylor and Jason. Our final question today will be from our very own Fong. And Fong, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Amy. And I'm moved by the conversation and trying to figure out a way to provide a certain provision, ideas that I've been thinking a great deal. In other words, I'm an immigrant. My family came to the US in 1980, and I never questioned whatsoever why we even came, knowing the fact that only the arrival of the Trump presidency that compelled me to go back and study American history, which I never did before. So it's interesting. So having gone back to read from the very beginning, the 75 Federalist paper and an anti-Federalist paper, and then election de Tocqueville, moving forward to the transcendental magazine, the Dial, that were created by Emerson and Margaret Fuller, all the way to, from 1847 till 1919. It's a long run. And one thing that I remember very clearly is the term that the Tocqueville invented is self-interest well understood. To me, that is something that's been lost for a long time. Having read recently Robert Putnam, you remember in 2000, there was a book called Bowling Alone. Mm-hmm. Was based on his previous, I think, lengthy essay in 1995, which I also read. It's called Bowling Alone, Americans' Declining Social Capital. Mm-hmm. And the book is so interesting to me because it reminded what also something that impressed the Tocqueville so greatly. The idea of self-interest, well understood, is really about voluntary join together, the act of people coming together. No one ever waited for the federal support or come and solve their own problem, social problem, community problem. So the idea of voluntary joining together in association is a way to further interest of the group. Therefore further your own interest. So the group had to be first, the community had to be first, and then you will be the result out of having that incredible, energy built around it from the community. And so I think about that a great deal. There's certain reduction in all form of in-person social gathering. That's exactly what Americans used to educate and thrive upon, is the community come together. They work so hard. I mean, we all came here. I don't remember my family worked so hard. We did work hard in Vietnam, but not like this. 6 days a week, the 7th day you get together and you talk. That's exactly what impresses the Tocqueville. It's something that never happened in Europe from his own country. So that's one way to rethink about it. That's why we're doing what we do at the Rail the same way, to amplify the imminent warmth of people being together, talking together. But I want to also ask a question about philanthropy, which I'm sure it apply different group of differently, you know. Philanthropy is to love people. That's exactly what the word means. Like the word philosophy is to love wisdom. And I just came back from Malaga, Spain, Taylor, Jason, where there was a Picasso museum built because that's his birth, you know, that's where he's born. I mean, it's a thriving city because of Picasso. And at the opening reception of the show, the culture minister of Spain came, gave a long speech, the mayor came, and the rest of anyone in Spain came to pay homage and celebrate the gathering. I know in America, we don't have, you know, minister culture. We have the equivalent of the National Endowment of the Arts or National Endowment of Humanities, which is incredibly impoverished and gets censored all the time. So my point is philanthropy is so interesting because in Europe, you don't need to do that. The state take care of your cultural life, so to speak. Here, the federal government don't care about culture, so it rely on philanthropists who would support it, different cause and whatnot. But in your experience, because you mentioned theater of war, Ryan Doris is a dear friend of mine, the rail, recently got a Mellon grant to do what he needs to, you know, apply for different production. But how challenging to what you do in philanthropy, and how do you go about it? Sorry for the long-winded question there, Donna.
Let's have another session on that question. There's a very facile understanding of the separation of church and state. That is some of what we're trying to do in Bricks and Mortals, is to get over the false binary, sacred and secular. There are beautifully individualistic forms of religion, but there is a bond at the level of community. And you hurt us, you hurt people who have no religious faith at all. And that's really important we have to, so many things about our Constitution are immature. And it was just made in a different time. So philanthropy is allergic to religion. So the way you raise money from philanthropists, I mean, our founding grant was from the Community Fund of New York City. And we had to stand on our heads to get that grant, and assure them that we wouldn't do any activism, and assure them that we wouldn't do any converting. Philanthropists need to take a first course in plural religion, which many of us practice now. I understand that, you know, there are fundamentalists on the right and the left, and in everybody. There's a little fundamentalism in all of us, I think. But we are not fundamentalists. We are plural. And we know how to do plural. The most plural places in the country are church basements, because they are open to people's conversations about real things, and old and young, all addicts and non-addicts gather there and are welcomed and are not shamed. It's really, it's so hard, but frankly, raising money, of course, is hard. But what we've all agreed about today is we have some common needs that need common solutions.
Yeah.
We need places to go to develop those common solutions.
I mean, Jason, Taylor, I mean, I know that big philanthropy or big foundation tend to have a kind of a machine, serious, deep embedded machine or bureaucracy. In other words, by the time you fill out your application, you may as well get a PhD on the subject. And not to mention that they would not allow you to come and see them and vice versa. So it's very frustrating that there's no personalized rapport. There's a sense of intimacy, desire to understand what you do, you know. So, but I think Donna's right. I think that we have to work what we have and try to amplify intimacy among people we know and do what we can, because everything counts, you know, because that's what is really terrifically work and sustaining the organism of the rail for that long. It's been 22 years now and it's free. And we built on that very premise, imminent warmth of social intimacy instead of social distancing. So that's what we try to do. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to re-listen to it and learn more about what you both do. And Donna, it's terrific. Thank you so much. Back to you, Eleanor.
May I offer just one response? If I
Sure.
may. I think there's a different way. There's an additional layer to this that we can think about when it comes to philanthropy. Philanthropy follows, it doesn't lead. Philanthropy responds to cultural priority. It does not decide cultural priority. And the purpose of these conversations, of the work that Donna's doing, the work that Jason and I are doing in Bricks and Mortals, and through the architectural practice at MBB, it is all about proving out the theory that both the organizations, the buildings, that all these relationships are in the public interest, that our interests are related, that we are dependent upon each other, and that failure of one will mean failure of both. And the greater the public understanding of that reality, I think the better alignment we'll see with the philanthropic organizations.
Yep.
Super true.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Taylor.
Very good.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Taylor, and thank you, Fong, for that amazing question. It's been such a great conversation. Thank you, Taylor and Jason and Donna. It's been fantastic. We do have a tradition here at the Rail of closing our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Amy Saul-Zerby, to the stage. Amy Saul-Zerby is the author of Paper Flowers, Imaginary Birds, Deep Camouflage, and Choose Your Own Beginning. Her poems have appeared in The Rumpus, the Chicago Review of Books, American Poetry Review, Painted Bride Quarterly, and elsewhere. She edits voicemail poems. Thank you so much for being here today, Amy, and I'm thrilled to pass it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. That was a really interesting discussion. And I appreciate the opportunity to listen and then to close it out with some poetry. So I'm just going to read a few poems from my books and then one new piece, I think. So the first one is called, it's from my first book, and it's called The Unscorched Earth. I had expected some sort of eruption. There should have been an earthquake. When I said I don't love you anymore, the heavens should have shaken. After we ended, I think what bothered me most was the way the ground lay still beneath me, the gall of the unscorched earth. This is called Who We Are. The wind is not alone in not howling, but something cries out in the night or wants to. Something wants to cry out and doesn't know how. It wants to be heard and at the same time to be so silent that it will disappear. You wait until the house is empty to scream. You are always waiting for the house to be empty to scream, or not to see if you will scream. We are always waiting for an empty house to tell us who we are. They will try to tell you that you wanted too much. When she didn't pass the test you didn't mean to put her through. When he gave you an ultimatum and called it a choice. When you pushed too hard and he didn't pull you back. They will try to tell you that you wanted too much, but you will know that it's not true. You didn't want too much, you only wanted in the wrong direction. Celestial bodies. When you start to worship him, remember that the moon is beautiful too, but it is wrong to confuse it with a star, to forget that it will never be a source of heat or light. If you must worship, worship the sun. If you must love something that keeps you warm. This is from my second book. It's called Kindness Does Not Indicate Weakness. I dreamt an envelope, a veiled threat, which is to say an enclosure, your breath made opaque, a careful arrangement, and of course not without recklessness. I can only keep up with you if I care whether I am keeping up with you. My voice also breaks into song or something not dissimilar. Quiet is all I know how to keep. Time slips through me, smiling. Affirmation number 56. The best things are the best things are the best things, but you won't be one of them until you see yourself right. Strip away the dysmorphic, the silent praying. It's not that you were never broken, but that you were never even breakable. You are not that fragile wondering, not the things that threaten or weaken. You've always been the things that lift. You are the lifting of things above breaking. You are so much light that sometimes it even hurts to look directly at you. You are never more beautiful than when floating, and you have never been more floating than you are right now. This is one from my most recent book, the title poem. It's called Choose Your Own Beginning. It would never be enough to be in love by itself, but it is still so good. I kiss your hands in the dream. I kiss your hands while you are sleeping and never take it back. Take the flowers from my hair, put me back in the earth where I always wanted to be. And this is the most recent, very new poem that I wrote. So it's not in any of the books, and I haven't read it to anyone. This is called On Getting Our Hands Dirty Together for the First Time. There was a storm coming and we raced it to the garden center, which was having a sale. I followed as you picked out marigolds, impatiens, and hostas for your patio. Somehow we made it all the way back to South Philly before the rain came. The next day after a walk, you offered to drive me home, but I said we should work on the patio. You showed me how to prepare a planter, how to tease out the roots, and together we potted every last flower. I struggled to keep the plants centered and straight. You said it's not a natural skill, but an original act. We took turns washing the dirt from our hands, surveyed our work, and prayed the squirrels leave it be. I prayed we never run out of firsts, that the things we grow outlive us, that before they do, we look back and remember the care we gave to them and smile. That's all I had. Thank you.
Amy, that was so beautiful. Thank you. That was a great way to close out this afternoon. And thank you for sharing those beautiful poems. And thank you again, of course, to Jason, Taylor, and Donna. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSC program and for making these daily conversations possible and for supporting our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For the past 22 years, the Rail has been a platform for arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSC. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail, and join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a 12 p.m. actually for a conversation with Hito Styrel and Paul D. Miller on the event of This Is the Future at the Portland Art Museum. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Khor Aliyah Ahmed. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for tuning in. Great to see you all today.
Oh, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you,
Good
Taylor.
reading.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks,
Thank you
Jason.
all.
Taylor,
Thank
thank
you, Amy,
Jason.
for the
Thanks,
beautiful
Donna.
reading.
That was a
Thank you,
beautiful
Donna.
reading, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank
you,
you,
Donna.
Jason and
Please
Donna.